Welcome to the Universal Design for Learning webinar series, created by State Support Team Region 12 consultants. Session 3 will focus on the principle of engagement. I'm Susan Larson, and I will be narrating this session. The intended outcomes for this webinar are that participants will develop an understanding of the principle of engagement, guidelines, and checkpoints, and identify ways to reduce barriers to learning and create learning opportunities in the classroom. Engagement. This principle is associated with the why of learning, which uses the affective network in our brain. Learners vary greatly in what motivates them to learn. According to CAST, the Center for Applied Science and Technology, there are a variety of sources that can influence individual variation in the affect network, including neurology, culture, personal relevance, subjectivity, and background knowledge. Some learners are highly engaged by group work, while others prefer to work alone. What engages one will not necessarily engage all. What engages the teacher will not necessarily engage the learners. What are some of the barriers for the learners in your classroom? Pause the webinar and reflect on those barriers. Resume the webinar when you are ready. Some common barriers that may be present in your classroom are gaps in achievement levels, particularly reading below grade level, lack of motivation, especially intrinsic motivation, limited background knowledge about a topic, and limited vocabulary. How could you offer choice of materials? Seating, technology versus paper pencil. Could learners work alone to increase an individual's engagement if that is their preference? The 3 Universal Design for Learning principles are divided into 3 guidelines with several checkpoints. You will need time to explore and think deeply about each one of the guidelines and its corresponding checkpoints. You will have an opportunity to complete an activity aligned to this principle after the webinar. But please keep in mind, you will revisit this information continually as you design lessons and implement UDL. The checkpoints that you focus on for a particular lesson will depend on the learning goal. And remember, these are meant to be suggestions, not a prescription. You will not focus on all of these at once. During this webinar, we are going to look at the first row, which is the access row, and dive deeper into recruiting interest and one of the checkpoints. In the access row, the suggestion is to provide options for recruiting interest. Let's look deeper into the first checkpoint. Optimize individual choice and autonomy. Here is a standard from the ELA model curriculum for grade 3. Pause the webinar and brainstorm some ways you could provide options for recruiting interest, optimizing individual choice and autonomy, without changing the goal. If you'd like some ideas to get you started, access the Goalbook app, which includes a toolkit with strategies. The link can be found on the UDL Webinar Series Google Doc. Resume the webinar when you are ready to continue. Thinking about this ELA standard, one of the first ideas that comes to mind is letting learners choose their own story, something they want to read. Another choice could be where they read. They could read at their desk, on the floor, standing in the room, in a comfy chair. The key is to keep the options appropriate for the learner and for the mastery of the goal. Thinking about the other UDL principles, what options for representation would be appropriate? What options for action and expression would be appropriate? Pause the webinar if you'd like to extend your thinking or discussion to the other UDL principles. Resume the webinar when you are ready. If you'd like to take a deeper dive into this principle and its guidelines and checkpoints, please complete the activity provided on the UDL Webinar Series Google Doc. You will be using one of your own lesson plans, your choice, and some reflective questions to look at each of the guidelines and checkpoints. We have included some additional links to resources to support your learning. After completing the activity, you may choose to complete and submit the Google Reflection form. A certificate of professional development for 1 contact hour will be sent to your email. Please check out the additional resources listed on the last page of the UDL Webinar Series Google Doc. Thank you for watching this webinar. For a deeper dive into the other 2 principles of universal design for learning, please check out the next 2 webinars in our series.